Well, welcome everyone to our webinar where we will discuss we'll be discussing the state of automotive program management. It's bright and early here on the West Coast, so thank you everybody for joining. My name is Angela Simoes and I will be your moderator for today. Next slide, a few housekeeping items before we get started. If you have any questions, please pop them into the chat module for the GoToWebinar, as everyone will remain muted. If you think of questions after this, you can always email us later, but if you pop your questions into the chat, I will read them out to our speakers. So in today's discussions, we will hear some pretty amazing findings from a survey of more than 180 program managers across 3 countries, and how we can make automotive program management more efficient, ultimately improving the bottom line of suppliers and improving the quality of life of program managers everywhere. And let me just say, after this study, you might think, why am I a program manager? Because I certainly wouldn't want to be a program manager. Oy vey. Anyway, our speakers today are Chad Jackson, CEO and Chief Analyst at Lifecycle Insights, Mike Lewandowski, Vice President of IT at Modnear Company, and Dave Opsahl, CEO of Actify. As Chief Analyst and CEO of Lifecycle Insights, Chad leads the company's research and thought leadership programs. He attends and speaks at industry events and reviews emerging technology solutions, and Chad's 25-year career has focused on improving executives' ability to reap value from technology-led engineering initiatives during the industry's transition to smart and connected products. An industry expert, Mike Lewandowski, has proven technical leadership and project management experience across the field of operations management, supply chain, customer service, business process improvement, cross-functional team leadership, and forecasting. Modnear is Actify's first APM customer, and they are a leading manufacturer and fabricator of low to medium volume complex metal components and assemblies for the automotive, military, truck and trailer, and industrial markets, utilizing stamping, roll forming, welding, machining, painting, e-coating, and other specialty processes. So many of you joining us today may very much relate to the work that they do. The CEO of Actify, Dave, has more than 30 years in the manufacturing industry, including positions such as VP of Corporate Development at Texoff 3D, Managing Director of SageMark LLC, a consultancy, working with technical software developers and users on sales, marketing, corporate development, and implementation strategies. If you have some time, check out Dave's column on Forbes.com, where he talks about supply chain challenges, the future of the automotive industry, and how the relationship between OEMs and suppliers needs to evolve. And I'm sure all of you have some thoughts on that. To get us started, we'll have Dave give a brief overview of Actify and why the company is focused on solving the challenges within program management. Dave.
Thanks, Angela, and thanks to everybody for attending. Thanks to Mike and thanks to Chad for joining us today. Actify is best known in the industry as the developer of Spinfire, a solution for taking complex design information, distilling it down while retaining all of its value and being able to distribute that throughout stakeholders in an organization. Many of our 1,500 plus companies are in the automotive supply chain, and that's part of the reason why this is such an area of focus for us. Some years ago, we began development of a platform to help those companies manage a lot of the data that they were dealing with coming from their OEM customers. And they started asking us to add things to that platform. And the more we looked at it, the more we understood that there is a huge challenge in the area around program management, which is where a lot of our customers use our software. And that led us to develop a solution on top of our platform for automotive program management, something that we introduced and delivered into the market in June of this year. And the more we've looked at it, the more we've talked to companies like Modnear and many of their peers, we're seeing just a huge number of challenges in that area. The volume of programs that most suppliers are dealing with is increasing enormously, in part due to electrification. So as companies start to migrate more towards electric vehicles and produce those, they're adding programs, not eliminating programs on the internal combustion side at this point. So it's, in some cases, it's doubled down, and the volume is just huge. The pressure on the program managers is just, tremendous, increasing. Customers, the OEM customers, are demanding faster response times, and there's no sign of that letting up. So we felt that it was time that somebody built a solution, purpose-built solution for solving this program management problem we're going to talk about today.
Thank you, Dave. And so now we're going to have Chad delve into the results of the study. And we really want this to be interactive. So those of you joining us, as you are seeing the results of this study, if you have questions or thoughts, or yes, that's my world, or no, that's not really how it is, please pop those comments into the chat. We want to hear from you, because while we have validated this information, not only through the survey, but in the many, many, many conversations we've had with customers, we want to hear from you as well. So please pop your comments into the chat as Chad is going along. And without further ado, Chad.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I appreciate having me participate in this activity. I think it's a really important topic. But before we get into the findings, just real quick about us. Basically, Lifecycle Insights, our company, conducts a lot of research. We publish that research in a lot of different forms. And really our focus is on initiatives that are pursued in the product development arena. Almost all of those are enabled by technology nowadays. I mean, you really can't, it's very rare to have an initiative that is not empowered by technology. And that's what we've done with this one. If you can go to the next slide. So, anecdotally, I've always heard that program management is extremely difficult. It's not a job for those of weak will, that's for sure. But we were really curious to understand, well, what does that look like? From a tactical perspective, from an initiative, our company's trying to improve the way they're executing program management today. And what does that look like? Where are the pitfalls? So we embarked on this journey with this research study back in April of this year. As Angela mentioned, we have over 180 respondents kind of in the, companies that often will act as tier ones. Not always, but those that are fairly high in the automotive supply chain. So let's go to the next slide. Over the next 20-25 minutes or so, we're going to touch on these topics. So first, we want to get a feel for how do suppliers feel they're doing today. It's always to get a good self-assessment and understand what that looks like. We then wanted to look at what are the tactics, what is this activity, this role, this process. It's kind of an amalgam of all those things. What does it look like today? What are people trying to accomplish? We then wanted to look at the outcomes. So how are suppliers doing in terms of performance? And then we wanted to peer a little bit into the future. What's changing in the industry? And what does that mean for this practice of program management? So let's go ahead and let's go into the first topic, and you can go through actually the next two slides. This is just a marker. So one of the first things we wanted to ask about was, how do you feel like you're doing with program management? So we provided this question to all the respondents, and they had a number of different answers ranging from we're really bad to we're really great. And what's interesting about that, both from a practice perspective, as well as the IT systems that they're using, the feedback was very rosy. It was very, hey, we're doing really good. In some cases, we believe we are world class. So that was an interesting takeaway in and of itself. Let's go ahead to the next slide. But also what's interesting is this. So what is your opportunity to get better in this front. And look at that, you know, good to great, right? So a lot of companies feel like they're doing maybe the best that they can. You know, this is a notoriously difficult practice to employ, but a lot of companies feel like they can improve a lot, right? So that's an interesting dichotomy to kind of look at that. So, and we're going to talk more about this here in just one second. And lastly, let's take a look at the next slide. We also wanted to understand, okay, are executives kind of endorsing the investment or pursuit of an initiative to improve this area? And you can see here, you know, either, you know, basically a third of these companies have executives that are leading the effort, or they have lower level folks, maybe from a grassroots level, kind of bubble up and say, hey, we need to do things better. And the percent of companies that are really not doing anything is really small. You can see it's under 10%. So there's a really interesting story here. And Dave and Mike, I want to open this up and have a conversation around this and get your perspectives. You know, what are you seeing in the industry? What's your take? Love to hear your thoughts.
Sure. Mike, do you want me to go first, or would you like
you
to?
go ahead. You go ahead. I'd love to hear it first.
Well, it is interesting. You know, there's a bit of a dichotomy there. You know, that there's such a huge opportunity to do better and to improve, and yet, you know, people, if you were to look at that first slide, would think that, you know, that would suggest that maybe they're satisfied with the status quo. But I think that from the conversations that I've had with, you know, probably more than 30 suppliers over just the last few months, that every one of them has a very similar story to tell. That there is a way that program management has been done, and I think we're going to get into a little bit about how it's being done today a little further on, but it's being done in a very manual way, and it seems that it's consistent in terms of how that's done, you know, across the industry. It's not working for anybody particularly well. But yet, you know, it's a very similar approach that everybody takes. You know, you have people running around, you know, trying to get status information and share that with stakeholders on a pretty regular basis. And yeah, I think everyone knows that although you know, program management is generally done, you know, about at the same level from company to company, there's just a huge opportunity out there to do something different, to actually use technology in a smart way for that. So I think that's my perspective.
I think, Dave, there's also comfort in the familiar in this case too, that you feel pretty good about a process that you've done day in and day out. When we talk to our program managers about this, you know, they don't feel a sense of failure. They feel a sense of being overwhelmed from volume, but they don't feel like they're failing at their job. You know, where this really, you know, from an optics standpoint in our company, kind of top down. It was an absence of that visibility into the programs to even provide resources to help the team, to know where things are off track or on track. And I think you look at this stat here, right here, where, you know, a third of companies are saying, hey, their executives are sponsoring an endeavor here. Well, that's because of a lack probably of that top down visibility and the clarity on which levers to pull to help the team. So that was one of the things that we kind of internally discovered as well, and you know, in our journey, something that initiated this discussion.
If I could just add one comment that, you know, in one of our meetings with customers to your point, Mike, about being overwhelmed, they don't feel like they're failing, they're just overwhelmed. He said, we walk along the edge of the cliff all day, every day. So if you're, to our attendees who are with us today, if that resonates with you and you have any feedback, we'd love to hear your comments in the chat. But that always, that is still in the forefront of my mind every time we talk about this topic in the survey results. I can't imagine walking along the cliff all day, every day and still having any hair left.
Yeah, feel for them for sure. Absolutely. All right, well, let's get into the next section. Let's talk about some of the tactics. You know, we got a good high level overview. Companies probably feel they're doing the best they can, but we want to understand, okay, tactically, how is program management getting done today? So we asked some kind of technology agnostic questions, you know, in terms of roles, responsibilities, in terms of the activities they're doing. And one of them is this: how frequently do you communicate with the following roles and departments And you can see on the left, the darkest blue is hourly, going all the way up to never, right? And it was really interesting when we were developing, we had a debate about this question. Should we really include hourly? I'm like, yes, we should. You never know just how acute this problem might be. But I mean, look at the frequency. And I think this speaks to the need. Well, I think this speaks to the reality of product development and the execution of programs today. There's a lot of moving pieces. You know, this is a dynamic, living thing that is changing all the time. And you have to keep up if you're going to identify issues and mitigate those issues, right? So this kind of speaks to the reality of trying to keep everybody coordinated, everybody on the same page. Let's go to the next slide. So then, you know, we asked questions around, well, how are you doing that, right? And we actually have a whole bunch of questions and results like this. It's part of a set of, well, actually a report that you can get through Actify right now. But this one was, how often do you send and receive files or data with all these other participants? And again, you can see hourly in some cases and daily. In some of these, for some of these respondents, you're seeing it's way over 50%. There's daily emailing of files back and forth. And just think about the risk that interjects into your program. Emails can be lost, they can be buried in inboxes, files can be outdated as soon as they are sent. That in and of itself represents a huge risk to maintaining real-time insight into the program. So we're starting to see, okay, this is the activity that needs to happen. Here's the tactic of how it's getting done, and there are inherent flaws along the way. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. We then try to figure out, okay, how are you also getting the information you need to understand the current status? Because you can, you know, just because you receive a file doesn't mean you have to do something manual with it. You can actually use some automation, you can use some integration, but as you can see here, you know, the yellow is manual activity. The dark blue is file exports and imports. So again, very manual type of activity, separate from the files. You know, manual entry, think about the errors you can have just by typing in information into a spreadsheet as you're looking at a different one, right? That's another source of error that can be interjected in the process. All right, so let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So kind of zooming back out a little bit, we want to understand, well, how does a program manager spend their time? And this is the answer that we got. Look at how cut up this, you know, this pie is with all these different responsibilities. But also, as you read them, think about, are these value-added activities? You know, are you doing something to gain and maintain real-time insight? And are you doing something to mitigate risk within your program? And if you look at a lot of these activities, of course, a lot of people feel like, well, that's the reality of program management today. That's the best you can do. But this still speaks to the reality that program managers are running all over the place. They're trying to catch up with people. They're trying to get the latest from files. And it's a current, it's an ongoing maelstrom of chaos that they're trying to maintain and keep control over. Important takeaway from this point. And let's go to the next slide, this last slide in this section. So a lot of program managers have been using general purpose business tools. You know, let's be frank. I mean, to date, there haven't been a whole lot of program management tools to help these folks tame the chaos, the dynamic nature of programs. So what are you going to do? You're not just going to sit back and go, well, I guess there's nothing we can do. You can start to try to customize, configure, integrate a general business tool to fit your specific needs. And that's what you see on this slide. There's varying level of customization, but I mean, look at this, moderate to heavy, which are both categories on the right, the dark brown and the darker yellow. look how high that is for these respondents. And look at some of the types of solutions here. Spreadsheets, documents. Now, I got nothing against a spreadsheet, but if you're customizing it that much, you have a really significant unmet need in terms of a specific business solution. So let's stop there for a second. Dave and Mike, I want to hear your perspectives on this. Dave, you want to go first again?
Sure. Yeah, I think this was one of the things that just really stood out to me is as an opportunity is when you look at the kind of communication, back in the pie chart slide, and you've got words like track, coordinate, retrieve, inform, collaborate. It's a great question about value-added activity. There's not a lot of value there. Why is that going on? Well, look at the amount of information that's changing and the fact that there is no visibility when things are changing that rapidly. The idea that you can take, the spreadsheet when it's used the way we see it in program management is just a placeholder to keep what is the current status, of a particular item in the program. And, the need to be able to know what that status is at any particular point in time speaks to the fact that you need to do something to connect those silos of information. A lot of that information is living inside systems that are built for a specific functional need. There's no reason that those can't be leveraged to get rid of the need to manually chase that information and give program managers an opportunity to get proactive, stop being reactive. And that's the opportunity that we see for how people can improve. Let's centralize that information, create a system of reference, connect the silos, and be able to give people that overview of where that activity is going on and what's happening with it. So very strong indication that this is a huge area for improvement.
Yeah, definitely ripe for disruption, right, Dave? And so from my standpoint, heading up IT at a manufacturing tier 1 automotive supplier, when I started, we walked around the engineering offices and program management offices, and there was a board of taped on, top project statuses on every program within the company. And I said, what is that? And they explained it. And, in talking with the program managers, that board it's almost valueless the second you tack it up there because of the rapid change of that information. We see here in the slides, things are changing hourly, with some, suppliers. That's very typical in our experience. And, to take the time and post it up on a board, and just to communicate static information didn't really help. So just wanted to, make that point that, the area is absolutely ripe for disruption. And that's why we started looking around at opportunities out in this space, something that's always breathing, always living, always real time. The other thing too is I look at this slide here that's still up on the screen. This one scares the bejesus out of me in my job, because what you don't want to do as an IT manager is have something that you have to support, something you have to throw resources at that never goes away, that requires a lot of coding and customization and expertise that goes with that. So something that's more of an industry standard solution. When you look around at the challenges that everybody's trying to solve, it's the same problems with the same partners and the same conversations being had and requirements on suppliers. Why are we all solving this a million different ways? So that's why we wanted to take a stab at who could we partner with that can help us kind of solve these challenges the same way that makes sense for everybody.
Agreed.
Quick time check. We've got about 20 minutes left.
Okay, good, excellent. Well, let's get on to the next section. So let's talk about the outcomes. So we talked about the high level kind of overview of how people feel things are going. Talked about the tactics. Now let's talk about some outcomes. So we included this question just to get a gauge of how well or how disrupted programs are today. So we listed off a large number of issues. ranging from downstream mistakes resulting from missing or out of date information, and it goes on and on. So what's interesting about this is the dark brown is significant problems causing major disruption to the program. The dark yellow is a moderate problem causing disruption downstream. And this is the last thing you want as an automotive supplier. I think everybody knows that a lot of these contracts have capped margins. And if you don't perform perfectly, you lose margin off of that. So these issues become significant because you can get penalized because if you have very high non-conformance rates, then that's material that you've lost, and that's margin off the top as well. So the frequency, the big takeaway, the frequency at which these issues are manifesting in these programs are a testament to just how outdated the approaches and the IT systems are to support programs. This is kind of the outcome result that everybody wants to avoid, and frankly, companies have been trying to avoid for a really long time. This is why executives are leading, in 1/3 of the respondents, executives are leading change initiatives. And there's only 10% of companies that are doing nothing. This is the impetus. So we saw this, and with wide eyes, we're alarmed for a lot of the industry. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So what happens, what could suppliers do if they address this issue? If they, eliminate a lot of those disruptions and get them back under control and kind of manage them? So this is really interesting. So we had a lot of different outcomes that we asked respondents about, but reducing the cost of the program was number one. And I found that to be really interesting. We talked about the capped margin that is usually associated with these contracts. If you reduce the cost of the program, that goes directly to profit, right? That's a way for suppliers to be more profitable, to be more successful, to be able to grow and possibly go out and win more contracts. So frankly, I was surprised that this was the outcome that people expected. If they could execute program management better, that would be the changed outcome for their company. So let's stop there for a second. Dave, you wanna talk about this one first?
Sure. Yeah, I think that one of the things that if people on the call are involved in program management, which hopefully they are, the X factor here is that in many cases, it isn't that you can increase your profit, it's that you can retain the margin that you established when you bid on the program to begin with. Because what normally happens is that the disruptions that we were talking about earlier generally tend to come out of the supplier's pocket, and that creates issues. So if you are able to retain that margin, it gives you an opportunity to be more competitive. It also has a lot to do with the relationship with the OEM. You're able to improve that relationship. You are improving your chances of winning additional business off in the future. We hear that frequently with the suppliers that we talk to. So to me, it really is about getting control over the program, being able to have that visibility, get ahead of the issues that create those exceptions, okay, and be able to retain that margin and improve, the competitiveness of the company. And that's going to become more important with the activity we see going on out there.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add on these slides other than I wholeheartedly agree with the content on them. We certainly, in a role like program management, we see our program managers that spend a lot of time trying to manually communicate information between different departments. I think that's been reflected in the past slides, but it is well known within our organization, I think within the industry, that reducing the amount of manual communication and dual work, triple work, wrong work because somebody got the wrong message or an outdated message on what is due or what is the next task to accomplish, can certainly help us be more competitive in the industry. And obviously, when you lower your costs, you can be more competitive in your bid and pass along those savings to the market, which is obviously something that we want to do in this space as costs continue to rise on everything. We're heavily dependent upon steel. Everybody probably on this call knows what steel's done in the last year to 2 years, and something like this can go a long way to helping shave margins when your raw materials are going crazy. So yeah, wholeheartedly agree with these slides.
Great, good, excellent. Well, let's talk about what's coming next. So again, we talked about a lot of companies feel like they're doing the best they can. We talked about these tactics that have inherent flaws. Then we talked about performance and how it's really not what people would hope for. So there's a story there where program management is overwhelmed, and this is a theme that we've hit on again and again and again. Well, there's no rest coming. So the question we asked is, how have things changed over the past 2 years? And you can kind of project that out as to what's going to happen in the future too. So the number of OEMs, the volume of programs, time to startup, duration, impact of the transition to EVs. You can see there is significant increased challenge in each of these areas. That's the dark blue and the medium blue, I guess is what you could call it, increased sum. So this speaks to some of the things that Dave touched on before. It's not just that EV work is replacing, gas combustion engines and vehicles. It's in addition to that. There's more variation in the vehicles that are being produced today. They're being, built for purpose. They're being customized and configured for niche applications. We're getting into this age of mobility solutions where things are designed to be turned over very quickly because the technology can be outdated very, very quickly. So for a program management practice that is already struggling to keep up or struggling to kind of contain the chaos of these programs, this is going to be an additional stressor, right? Things are going to get more and more difficult, which leads to that impetus for change. This is why you need to seriously consider a technology-led initiative to improve how you execute program management. Let's go ahead and talk about the next slide. Not only is it kind of at that high level, number of OEMs are changing, but there's lots of more tactical things that are increasing in complexity as well. You can see the number of certifications and regulatory compliance kind of requirements that suppliers must comply with. And there's lots of other ones as you go down that list. And again, if you look at that blue, the blue color, which is way over to the left from the right end, you can see this is really a challenge in the industry as well. And this is yet another kind of measure of complexity that suppliers are going to have to deal with. And with program management, this is not going to make it any easier. So if it's a challenge today, it's going to get more difficult. And again, this is why a lot of executives are looking at how do we get better? How do we address this proactively instead of being reactive with all of these challenges? So let me stop there. Dave, any commentary on this?
Well, I think that the point about the complexity increasing is absolutely something that we see. One of the things that's been surprising to me is that even with some of the challenges the industry's had is that a lot of the suppliers we see are actually going up market. And what I mean by that is they're becoming responsible for a larger percentage of what they deliver to the OEM customers, to the point of, in some cases, delivering an entire, chassis and, just leaving out the drivetrain, for instance. They're just continuing to go up that way. The number of programs, increasing. there's just nothing slowing down. And it is that pace of change. I think you used the word maelstrom. I would second the use of that. It is a vortex of a problem. It just is going to continue to spin. There's nothing here to suggest that this is going to slow down at all. And in the conversations that we have with suppliers every day, they're seeing this, across the board. So that's my observation about it. Mike, what do you think?
I think the other thing too, it's not just the existing relationships that are compounding. It's the fact that we have a lot of new partners in the market here that are relatively freshmen in their status. With the electrification of the industry, just personally speaking, we have a lot of new partners that we're supplying as a tier 1 supplier. And they're learning how on their end to do some of the things that, maybe Detroit kind of came up with a standard plan, a few decades ago about how to do that. Well, that whole concept is being disrupted a little bit too, that everybody's got their own flavor of how to attack this and how to communicate with their suppliers and what things they need. And that's taken some of our requirements and kind of spun it on its head a little bit. And when you have information buried away or locked within individuals or individual spreadsheets, the ability to respond and react to that in an agile state becomes very challenging when you can't share information easily across the company where everybody's on the same page at the same time. So I think that highlights that change in the industry, and I think it's something we're seeing firsthand as well.
Good, great. Excellent. So I think, Angela, back to you, right?
Yep. Actually, Dave, I think you have a challenge you'd like to issue to our attendees today.
There is. And actually, Mike probably didn't realize it, but he was actually giving me a lead into that. One of the things that, and Mike, it was the comment you made about we're all trying to solve the same problem. Why are we trying to do it separately? I had that same conversation with the vice president at a supplier just a couple of weeks ago that was trying to, for the second time, work with a partner and ask that partner to modify a piece of software to try to address this problem. And I just looked at him and I said, why are you doing this by yourself? In the 30 years that I've been around, I have never seen a function in a company that is so identical from company to company to company to company. If you talk about manufacturing operations, or you talk about production, or you talk about design engineering, there are similarities between companies, but they have a lot of variance in them. That's not true with program management. It is the same problem, and it takes a community to be able to solve that problem. And I would like to suggest to the folks that are listening to the webinar that they need to join that community, help us figure out how to solve this problem for everybody, because it is the same exact problem for everyone. The variation is very, very, very small. And so we would like to ask you to follow. We have a LinkedIn group where we talk about the challenges in automotive program management. If this is something that's impacting your company, talk to us. We'll give you everything that we know in terms of information, the help that you need trying to figure out how to solve that problem. But if we attack this problem as a community, we can get a solution out there. And that's why we built the APM solution, from Actify, was to be that foundation for solving that problem. So join the community.
And as a follow-up to this webinar, we will send everybody, obviously a thank you email, but we'll include a link to that LinkedIn group where you can join the discussion, as well as links to the report on Actify's website, Lifecycle Insights, and if anybody would like to know more about Mode Near as well. So we have a few minutes left. So we do have a couple of questions that were submitted, and for those that these came in privately. So if you are shy or don't want anyone else on the webinar to know that it was you that asked the question, you can always send the question directly to me privately on the chat. So the first question is for Mike. What recommendations would you make to a company considering an APM project, and how do you convince your boss that it is something that you should do? So maybe you could talk about how that process went for you, Mike, when you first learned about what Actify was doing.
Absolutely, yeah. So I think the first thing is to stay in lockstep with the exec team on what we just talked about here today. I mean, these are industry-wide challenges. This is not just your organization going through this challenge, but I'll tell you what, the first people who can crack this nut are going to see a pretty extreme advantage for a while. I think there will be a period of time where there's some early adopters, and I would put us in the category of an early adopter, absolutely. But once you get over that maturity index curve, you're going to see a lot of value out of that platform as it starts to gain mass and becomes kind of the industry-wide standard that, hey, if you want to efficiently operate program management in the automotive space, here's what you do, and it's not company by company by company. And if you're on that train, I think you're going to see some benefit from it early on. After a period of time, I think it's just going to be a cost of doing business that you need to be doing that, or else you can't compete, or you're going to lose that margin that we talked about, that you kind of, through lack of coordination and communication, you just can't compete with those that have it. So that was kind of the first thing, and to communicate that message to the executive team. Fortunately, that was a pretty straightforward, easy discussion for us. Our ownership and leadership is all aligned to that, and where we found a solution that was system driven, that became a pretty easy conversation to have and make. The other thing too, in terms of rollout, because it's a newer crack at this in the market, you really have to find your program managers who are your visionaries, who are willing to take a few lumps and not going to be the first ones to raise just the problems. They want to be able to see the solution from the get-go and help work towards that. I think identifying those people and getting them involved with your project is going to be critical to success, and really just making sure that you stay in tight communication through the course of the project about requirements. It's a very much an agile type thing where needs are going to be developed rapidly in a platform like this, and I think you've got some companies that are trying to address it. I don't think anybody's completely figured it out yet either, and the fact that you're willing to participate in that discussion about what that solution looks like is going to dictate your success on the back end. So I think having that wherewithal as a company and appetite to take on that challenge is important.
Your comment about identifying the program managers who are visionaries actually flows very well into this next question that we received. So this all makes sense, but we are ridiculously busy, as the slides here indicate, that all tier one, all suppliers are ridiculously busy. I don't know if we have the time to make a change. Any suggestions for how we could get started? So Mike, to your point, identifying those program managers that are visionaries, but then eventually you have to roll it out to the company. So can you talk a little bit about, and maybe Dave and Chad could chime in as well, what does it take to, when someone thinks about implementing a new system, I think they automatically think months, if not years. So can you talk a little bit about what the process has been like so far?
Sure. Yeah, and I can go pretty quickly to start off here, and I don't know if Dave or Chad want to follow on, but in our experience, we had to find a cutover, and we're not 100% there yet with all programs being on this platform because of the nature of some of those legacy programs. It's harder to lift and shift an existing program that we've already established a mountain of information out there, and you don't really want to break that. But we're fortunate enough to have a lot of new business coming our way, and taking the right partner in terms of an OEM and the right program to make the shift. We decided to cut over clean to start, and I think that helped a lot in terms of the supporting data, supporting documents, supporting processes with that OEM. We can kind of build around that in the platform. And that seemed to work pretty well. I would advise probably against shifting your most complicated, hardest, most robust program that's been out there for 22 years with an OEM. Maybe start with one of your new business ventures that's a little more flexible and a little more willing to work with you on that. I think that's done well for us to start, and something that I would recommend.
I'd like to add to that, Angela, if I can. I think, you know, there are a couple of things that we heard very clearly from our customer advisory board, which is really where the design decisions about the solution have been made. And the two things I'll say that came out of that is it has to be easy. It has to be simple. It has to make the job of the program manager easier. And so I think the question is coming from someone that's thinking about this in terms of typical enterprise software. You know, you have to find servers, you've got to install software, you need to train people. You know, that is a daunting task when you think of it that way. It's one of the reasons why we introduced this as a cloud solution, to get rid of those barriers for people when it comes to adoption. You want to do what Mike suggested, which is you do want to start with the right program, the right customer, the right program manager. You absolutely want to do that. But what you don't have to deal with is the issue of getting software installed, getting hardware installed. You know, once you have that executive commitment, you've picked the right programs. I think Mike would agree with me. It's been pretty straightforward. I won't say, you know, painless, but pretty straightforward in getting started, getting able to, you know, find a way to make this platform get rid of some of the problems that exist in the program management area today.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's very, anything cloud-based, we're very high on cloud-based solutions because of its ability to be agile, light, extensible. And when, you know, we're in an M&A type environment and we're acquiring companies, we don't have to drop some on-prem server and try and spin something up for them. We simply just give them a log on and they have access to our entire library of where we're at with programs, and they can start contributing. From a top-down standpoint, it also really helps tell the tale to our executives of where we're at, where our appetite is for improving, and where our pain points are with certain OEMs, to have maybe more difficult or transparent discussions with them about how we're communicating. But you know, from a legacy standpoint, I think that information was communicated versus, you know, via the squeakiest wheel or whoever would email the CEO, and that became our hot button issue. Now we can see through data where our real problems lie statistically, and it's not just based upon who's screaming or who's, you know, more aggressive in terms of program management. The quietest person and the loudest person in the room contribute the exact same information to the discussion. So that's become a new dynamic for us as well.
Excellent. So we are just a few minutes over, but I do have one last question I want to pose to Chad to wrap this up. You know, this is a function that has existed for decades, and people have been doing the same, you know, approaching it with the same rudimentary tools for decades. As you have seen adoption of new tools in various industries, do you really feel that this sort of mindset change can happen here across automotive suppliers or across the automotive industry? And what would it take to have that change happen successfully?
Yeah. That's a great question. So do I think that the change can happen? Yeah, I do. You know, I mean, just think about the activity around something like digital transformation. Like that's the big buzzword right now, and it kind of is an umbrella term for all these different types of initiatives that at their heart is all about enabling it with technology. So companies go through these types of initiatives all the time. Culture change is always a challenge. Sometimes it's the biggest challenge in terms of change. But companies are managing that transition all the time nowadays. There's so many companies that are making these types of changes. You know, maybe program management is relatively new. Again, that's where you could gain competitive advantage. But these types of efforts, you know, are pursued all the time by companies. So yeah, Absolutely. I don't see any reason it would be any different from other entrenched practices and processes that are improved by new technology.
Excellent, thank you. Well, that wraps up our discussion on the report, and Chad's research really shines a light on the challenges faced by program teams. And it seems that unless we really do something about it and introduce a solution, that things might just keep getting worse. But we've also heard that with the right technology, program management really is the key to unlocking the growth and profit potential for an electrified future, because really that's where it's all going, whether we like it or not. So thank you all for joining us today. You can download this full report at actify.com or lifecycleinsights.com. Please join our LinkedIn group. It's called Automotive Program Management. Just do a quick search, or we will also send out the link. You can reach out to the Actify team for a demo of our solution if you are interested at sales@actify.com. And a recording of this webinar will be available on actify.com. So if you would like to share it with your colleagues, share it with your boss to convince him that you need to make a change, please visit our website and download it there. Thank you again to our speakers, and we wish you a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Angela.